This year has been pretty historic, to say the least, as just a few months ago, we've seen the peace union of Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and the United States. But for Israel, this wasn't the only thing that has happened for the country. Morocco has started altering their education to focus on Jewish history and culture, while Saudi Arabia plans to fix or remove anything that is anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist in their textbooks. Along with the Middle East, the U.S. also gave their support to the country as the Trump administration is cracking down against a global movement to boycott Israel, while Secretary of State Mike Pompeo visited an Israeli settlement, becoming the first high-ranking American to do so. As we continue to see the remarkable progress being made, especially between Israel and other countries in the Middle East, what could be next for the country? Well, here to talk about that and the growing connection with Israel is Bryan Leib. He's the chairman of Hashevet, which is a watchdog group. Bryan, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming on. Just how historic is it seeing these peace deals brokered by President Trump, and will he be remembered for it?
Hi, Shaun. Thanks for having me on. Yeah, it's nothing short of remarkable. What President Trump has done and his administration has done with these Abraham Accords is he has helped take these longtime friendships between Israelis and Arab countries out of the darkness and into the light for the world to see. Israel has had warm relations behind the scenes with countries like Morocco, the UAE, the Kingdom of Bahrain, and so many more for many, many years, but it was always hush-hush and behind the scenes, and no one could ever talk about it. And the Abraham Accords have really changed the landscape, not just for today, in the next couple of weeks, the next couple of months, but for the future to come. As you mentioned, Morocco, Saudi Arabia, they're taking steps to really, make sure that these Abraham Accords will be lasting peace. The fact that Saudi Arabia is scrubbing language out of their textbooks that has been feeding into the anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism in the Middle East for years. And now Morocco, an Arab country, Shaun, is mandating onto their youth that they should learn about Jewish history and Jewish culture. It's just nothing short of remarkable, and I'm so excited to see what the future holds.
What would you say the sentiment is, or the thought process is, for Israeli citizens and seeing what has happened just in the past 4 years with their own country? How do they feel about that and all the changes that have happened?
They're extremely excited. I have lots of friends in Israel and throughout the world as well in the Middle East, and everyone is very excited. But it's not just Israelis, Shaun, that are excited. It's Arabs as well. I've had Arabs in UAE and Bahrain and Sudan reaching out to me over the last couple of weeks on LinkedIn, on Facebook, on Twitter, wanting to establish relations with me. So I can only imagine they're doing the same thing in Israel. And another thing to add is that over the last couple of weeks, as a result of the Abraham Accords and as a result of the MOUs and all the deals that are being signed, there are quite literally thousands of Jews and Muslims flying back and forth in the Middle East on planes to each other's countries. Again, that's just nothing short of remarkable, and it's going to have such an amazing impact on the region for not just years to come, but decades to come.
So moving forward, if Biden does get in office come January 20th, and you've seen the Abraham Accords happen, is there any more progress that you can foresee in the future that would be made under a Biden presidency, or would Israel be left by the wayside? Overall thoughts?
Well, I sure hope so. We'll see what happens. I'm a little reluctant to sound positive about it because one of Biden's first picks was to bring John Kerry back into the fold. And as we know, John Kerry is the Iranian regime's biggest cheerleader. So that's a little concerning. But I think this is going to have lasting impact. I think this supersedes anything that a president or his or her administration can do. Because Israel is not the Israel of 20 years ago. Israel in today's world is an economic, military powerhouse. And Arab countries are recognizing that. And they're also uniting, Shaun, against the one common enemy in the Middle East, which is the Iranian regime. So I think it's just, again, going to be not just a short-term win, but a long-term win. And back to your earlier question about, what does this look like for President Trump? I think that the Abraham Accords will most certainly be President Trump's crowning achievement in the Middle East. And I really hope that the world starts to recognize him and his administration for the work they've done.
Bryan, where can we go from here as far as relations with Israel, other countries? We've seen a lot happen, as we just pointed out in these segments. But where do we go from here? What's left on the agenda for Israel and the United States?
Well, there's so many more countries, Sean. There's so many more countries in the Middle East that Israel can take these relationships that they've had in the darkness and into the light. I'm told that Oman, Indonesia, and I'm sure you heard 2 or 3 weeks ago there was a delegation from Pakistan that arrived in Israel. So there's going to be more and more relationships and deals announced, and of course, the elephant in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia, and I think Saudi Arabia has been taking a tremendous amount of steps behind the scenes to normalize relations with Israel, letting flights, fly over Saudi airspace. The actions that they're taking with their education curriculum. I think it's time for Saudi Arabia to step up to the plate and make the normalization deal with Israel. So we're all hoping that that's going to happen next.
There seems to be a little bit of turmoil. I've got to ask you about this before you go. Let me know if you're comfortable with talking about it. Obviously, put you on the spot here, but the election process there in Israel between Netanyahu and Benny Gantz, it seemed to be this whole back and forth. They were unable to, I believe, get a brokered deal with the government funding going. Now, I believe that election process is still happening there. What is the latest there? It seems tumultuous at times. What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, I'm an American, so I certainly have my opinions and can help impact results here in American elections. What Israel does, with their elections is up to Israel and Israeli citizens. What I can tell you and what I'm seeing, Sean, is that as a result of these elections that will be held in a couple months, the right-wing parties and the right-wing blocs in Israel have gotten very, very much stronger. Blue and white has lost a lot of their influence. So regardless of who becomes the next prime minister, I think you're going to see a right-wing government in Israel, a government that's going to continue to push forward in looking for the world to recognize Israel as the only Jewish nation in the world, to recognize Judea and Samaria as a part of Israel. And I think that's going to happen. And regardless of what the outcomes is, my message always to Jews and Israelis living in America is that we don't have to love the government of Israel, but I do think that we have to do everything that we can to support the people and land of Israel, regardless of who the politics or who the politicians are. So
Yeah.
whatever happens, we're going to keep standing with the state of Israel.
Well, it's still an important story to follow here. As every American, this is how we correspond. This is how we relay with Israel. So who's leading the charge there? That remains to be seen. Bryan, Leib, good to see you. Thanks so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Sean. Have a nice day.